You're listening to Kizuki, the podcast. I'm Mae Yoshikawa, and I define the Japanese concept of kizuki as the following. Kizuki 1. A moment of epiphany, an aha of realization or insight which opens the knower to a new dimension of truth that was formerly unknown. 2. Steps in an incremental growth of awareness, resulting in a movement from ignorance to greater awareness of the bigger picture. A kind of knowing that cannot be undone, that cannot be unrealized. As a longtime yoga and meditation practitioner, a world traveler, and curious self-explorer, I'm obsessed with kizukis. Listen on each week for inspiring and enlightening stories that may just tip you over for your next aha. On this week's episode, When You're Stuck. Hi guys, I want to talk about authenticity and one of my first major aha moments, my kizuki moment, that has greatly shifted the trajectory of my life. And it happened over 20 years ago. And I was a student in university. I must have been around 20 years old. And I was in such a shit place. I was just down in the dumps. I've mentioned on one of my past episodes how my parents had gotten divorced when I was a teenager, and it crushed me. And a couple years following that, my mother started showing symptoms of a rare neurological disease. It took us 2 years to get a diagnosis, and the doctor said that it would be terminal. And I was just crushed. We all were. And I had such tremendous stress in my life. I was just in over my head, and so much struggle. And this internal pain, the agony, the mental and emotional stress manifested for me as depression, insomnia. My entire body was cold, and I was just not a happy person. I felt every day like I was screaming on the inside, yet on the outside, I was still clinging on and trying to go to school, trying to go to work to help pay for school, and getting good grades so that I could have some kind of a future. And I felt like I was not living on the outside what I was feeling on the inside. But what I was feeling on the inside was just so dark and hard. It was one of the early tsunami experiences of my life where I felt so pulled under, and I just didn't know how I was going to make it. Now, I would imagine it might be similar for you too, but the thing about being in such a shitty place is that you get really desperate. And I was desperate for anything that might help me, that might help me feel a little bit healthier, that might make me feel a little bit better, that just might bring a little bit more light into my life. And this is before I found yoga, and before that really started to shift the trajectory of my health and my life. But I remember I was at my neighbor's door at her house. This Japanese obasan, as we would call her, like an auntie lady. And she was a nice lady, and I had rapport with her, but we weren't really like friends, or we weren't really on a deep, connected level. But on this day, she noticed something that most other people didn't notice or pay heed to. She noticed that I was actually in bad shape. And right as I was about to leave her house, this little apartment, She took one good look at me and she said, "Are you okay?" And in the softness of that moment, I started to cry because I couldn't hold it in anymore. And it's ironic, but sometimes it's when people give you kindness. It's when people give you that generosity of the moment that makes you cry, that melted my walls and made me cry, as opposed to the hustle and bustle of everything else. And as these tears were rolling down my cheeks, she said, "みんなギリギリのところで生きてるのよね," which translates as, you know, everyone's living on the edge, pointing out how it wasn't just me going through a tough time, but that a lot of people are not necessarily expressive on the outside of what they're feeling on the inside. It's like we put on an armor and go to work every day or something. She goes back into her apartment, grabs this book, and she brings it back to me and she says, "Here, take this, read it, and make sure you bring it back to me. I only have one copy." So she lent me this book that was written by a Japanese woman. And it was probably one of maybe the first books I ever read that touched upon more spiritual matters, navigating life from the inside out. But at this point, remember, I was so desperate for anything. So I went home, I plopped myself into bed, I opened the book and I started devouring its pages. And I kept reading and reading and reading until something stood out for me. And this page said, "Waku waku shinagara ikinasai," or something of the sort, which is kind of like the Japanese version of "follow your bliss," or an invitation to live your life by following your excitement and following your joys. And when I read that heading in that chapter of the book, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, God, I can't even remember the last time I felt excited or the last time I felt joy, because my life just felt so dark and so heavy for so long. I thought to myself, oh, excitement. Isn't that the thing that, first graders, second graders feel on the night before they're going to Disneyland because they're so excited that they can't sleep? I can't remember the last time I felt that. And I felt this doomsday kind of, oh, here's the biggest clue on how to improve my life. And it's even that is out of reach for me. And I felt so abandoned and so doubly depressed about it. However, I turned the page, and then the next chapter read something like this. ワクワクすることがわからないときは、ワクワクしないことをやめることから始めなさい. It said, if you don't know what excites you or what brings you joy, then begin by quitting the things that don't bring you joy, that doesn't excite you. Kaboom! That really landed for me because I was like, oh my God, that I can do. There are so many things I can quit because it doesn't excite me. There were so many things in my life that I was saying yes to that wasn't really aligned with my joy and excitement at the time. And in hindsight now, I see that day, that week of my life as the time that I began to choose to intentionally live in alignment with myself. What we would call today to live in an authentic way. And since that day, little by little, even though it took a lot of courage at first, I pushed myself to say no to invitations or dinners or projects that I that didn't spark joy for me, that didn't excite me. And it was so hard at first because I was so afraid of not being accepted or not being liked. I was so afraid of turning other people down because I was afraid that they would turn me down and that I would be judged. But I know in retrospect that my choice to stop doing the things that didn't excite me, that didn't purely bring me joy, was the beginning of creating the space for what does excite me, for what does bring me joy to enter into my life again. Because how can all of the good enter if your life is so full and so busy with all of the things that doesn't even excite you? So my encouragement to you today is, when you feel stuck or when you feel stagnant in some ways, see if you could do a spring cleaning, not just of your closet, not just of your schedule and agenda, but of the relationships, of the engagements, and of all of the things that are taking up space in your heart and in your mind. And notice the things that are weighing you down because they're not truly exciting you or they're not truly bringing you joy. And see if you can push yourself to veer away from them and begin to spring clean it so that you can create the space for the new to enter. Thank you for listening. Learn more about me in my upcoming book, Kizuki, Realizations Beyond Time and Death, at my website, maey.live, or find me on Instagram at maeyoshiKawa.